So good morning, everyone. Welcome to our session about exceptional experiences in enterprise content management. So before we get going here, I wanted to share a story with you all. So here's the door to our Calgary office. It looks fantastic, right? It's beautifully designed. It matches the decor. Those shiny stainless steel handles. They're symmetrical left and right and front and back. Looks fantastic, matches the decor, etc., etc. You get the picture. So I used this door every day for 3 years. I'd walk up, I'd grasp that handle, and I'd pull the door and strain my shoulder as the door wouldn't budge. And then I'd remember that door swung inwards. We built our door so badly that we actually needed to provide instructions. We added that push sign after a couple of years of me straining my shoulder. So why am I sharing this story? Well, I'm sharing this story because it's the story of a bad experience. Despite this door looking fantastic, and even despite us spending time and energy designing the door and designing the experience, it was still a bad experience. So if it's possible to build a door with a bad experience, do you think it's possible to build an ECM or a records management solution with a poor experience? Now, maybe that's a cheap shot because, well, frankly, we all know that it is. We've all seen it. In fact, as our door opening debacle shows, it's actually quite easy to inadvertently develop a poor experience. So there's actually a name for this type of door. It's called a Norman door. It's named after a professor, Don Norman. He's a professor of all sorts of things, usability and experience design and all sorts of things. He's written a book, this guy. This is the book, The Design of Everyday Things. It's a really fantastic read. I'd absolutely recommend it. It's sort of a layman's guide to broad topics within the realm of design. So how does this relate to ECM? Well, as an industry, we've come so far. We're accessible, we're substantially digital and getting increasingly so. We're mostly searchable, but we're not really all that usable, and we're not thinking about exceptional experiences for our users. As an industry, we haven't spent all that much time and attention working out how to best engage and work with our users. And this is the area that Habanero and my team and I have been really focused on. So today, I wanted to share with you some of our work and some of our ideas in this space. So before we jump into it, my name's Rick Martin. I'm the practice lead for enterprise content management at Habanero Consulting. This is our agenda for our session today. We're going to be, I'm going to be talking for about 50 minutes, and then we'll have hopefully some time for questions and answers at the end. So first of all, I'm going to talk about how exceptional experiences can impact ECM or records management solution. Through this session, I'll be using records management and ECM fairly interchangeably. The difference in the terminology is largely based on individual perception and individual roles. So I switch back and forth between them. So I'll be talking about how exceptional experiences impact ECM. And then I'm going to cover off the key aspects in the process of building exceptional experiences within an ECM context. And then we'll wrap up, and like I say, we'll have some questions. So a quick word about Habanero. We're a Canadian IT consulting services company. We're really passionate about humanizing the workplace. So we leverage our skills in research and experience design to create what we consider to be delightful experiences for our users, in whatever context that is. So for us, this is intranets and portals and records management or ECM solutions. So I'm really proud to say that Habanero has won many awards in the area of designing experiences. These are two of the awards we've won. So actually the one on the right-hand side here is the Intranet and Digital Workplace Award. And the left-hand one here is the Nelson Norman Award. We won that Nelson Norman Award for redeveloping Enbridge's intranet. I've got a mock-up in a few slides' time. Enbridge is a Calgary-based energy company. So one quick fun fact that the Norman in the Nelson Norman Award is actually the same Norman as our Norman door, and that's the bit of the whole process that we didn't win any award for. So let's talk about enterprise content management. So I believe that several goals of enterprise content management, specifically adoption, compliance, and impact, can be driven by creating an exceptional experience for our users. Maybe we can even call them humans. So these ideas are sort of yin and yang. A great ECM solution can drive an exceptional experience for its users, and certainly developing a great experience will deliver a higher level of ECM compliance. So I could just skip all of the details in our agenda around how exceptional experiences impact ECM, and get on to the juicy bit, which is how we build the process itself. But I don't really believe that everybody here would really engage in the ideas if I don't talk about a little bit about the why. And the reason that I say that is simply because I didn't engage in these ideas for a long time. I wasn't sold on the value of considering the experience. I used to think that the user experience was about picking nice colors or making it look nice, or even worse, and makes me shiver, but making it look pretty. I have to be honest and say that when I was a project manager running projects in Habanero, I sort of resent the time and energy spent thinking about the experience. I'd agree to our team doing this user experience work, but secretly I'd be thinking that we could probably deliver more scope or more features rather than just kind of making it look pretty. And I have to say, I annoyed a lot of people in Habanero. But then I started to spot bad experiences. They're all around me. I stopped sort of accepting and accommodating them, and started to sort of really take note of them. Whether it's something as bizarre as this elevator panel, or a website or an app that's just kind of hard to use. I think that this transition for me was I started to understand that it's possible to develop exceptional experiences. And then there's also other things. There's odd websites like this one. This actually is a website. It exists. You can Google it, or at least it used to exist. The user experience in this product was so bad that somebody went to the effort of creating a website to complain about how bad this product was. When user experience is done right, it engages and it streamlines interactions with a solution, and it helps us realize the business value that we seek. And this is a mock-up of our Enbridge eLink intranet that won us that Nelson Norman Award. Through this journey, I realized that this isn't a waste of time or an extra piece of project that we can consider if we have extra budget. I realized that thinking about the user experience, or the experience generally, is about making it usable and about reducing the amount of training. It's about solution sustainability. That is, the solution continues to work and continues to prosper once the original users or the original sponsors have moved on. And finally, I realized that thinking about the experience is about making the solution more human. Now, if you're still with me, we can actually take this a little bit further. And I say that with caution, at the risk of sacrificing the progress I'm hoping that I've made in the last 10 minutes. I think we can actually make the overall experience more humane rather than more human. The phrase more human makes me think that we're trying to get humans to do robot jobs. Humane means having or showing compassion or benevolence. Thinking about being humane gives us permission to think about our treatment of the people that are using whatever solution we produce. So how does this impact enterprise content management? So when we consider the treatment of our users, we're able to identify points of friction and work towards eradicating or maybe just reducing those points. As we know in the physical world, friction slows things down and wears things out. Think about a bike chain. When that bike chain gets too dry, the friction slowly ruins the chain and needs to be replaced. So we were working with a large insurance company in Western Canada, and we noticed that the front of house claims reps would, upon meeting their customers, be writing down these really long website addresses of reference material prior to their meetings. This is my interpretation of those long URLs. This would actually take up a bunch of time and they'd be carrying these kind of scraps of paper around as they're engaging with their clients. So this observation led us to dig in a little bit deeper, and what we understood to be happening was that the claims reps would actually be having meetings with their customers in one of multiple rooms, and they could never predict which room that they would be in ahead of time. There was no sort of allocation or booking system. So that prevented them from going in ahead of time and getting the reference material they might need for that meeting set up. So you can imagine this is just total agony for them. They're scrambling to get to their meeting, and they're having to write down these long URLs, and they're sort of focused on these URLs instead of really their clients' problems. So this insight led us to develop a key piece of capability within their ECM solution. It's very simple, really. It just allows them to save their key reference documents or links to a toolkit within their own profile. And once they've done that, they can just go in into the meeting room they land in, and log in to that computer and bring up their reference documents. It's very simple. The takeaway here is that our thinking about the experience of the end user and understanding their journey holistically allowed us to understand some of the parameters and some of the context outside of the system, and allowed us to deliver a really great user experience for the end user as well as their customer. So it's worth stopping for a moment and thinking about who the users are. So for us, in an ECM context, these users are everyone that interacts with the ECM solution itself. Obviously, it includes our end users. It includes records managers or records administrators. Potentially, it includes IT folks or any other executive that may be working in the solution. So we have a really broad perspective of users that are actually accessing our system. And then furthermore, when we're thinking about the system, we think about the lowercase s system here of ECM. We're not just thinking about the solution itself, the bit where maybe you're uploading and tagging some content, or the bit that's destroying files in the back end. But we're thinking about a much broader perspective of that system. Of course, this includes the solution itself, but it also includes the user's physical environment. It includes the device or the devices that they're using, maybe the login screens or the VPN that they're having to navigate. Stepping back a little bit further, I'd consider the process of building the solution, the process that we're going to put our end users through, as also part of that system. Could be discovery, design, build, migration, training, and so on. But that's really the edges of the system that we want to be considering. So let's consider some areas of friction. When we're thinking about this lowercase s system, let's consider some areas of friction, or maybe of simply frustration within that system. So first, let's consider our records managers. I'm pretty sure that this isn't news to anyone, but records managers are underappreciated. We can probably even say under fire. We work with many records managers, and they, just like everybody else, are just trying to do their work, but they face obstacles and challenges. Have you ever felt like this? This is a tremendously dissatisfying way of being at work and existing at work, feeling like you're bugging people in order to get your work done. And yet that's often what's required for records managers or for ECM solutions to be successful. At a recent conference I was at, there was this roundtable session and the topic of enforcement came up. Ideas like 3 strikes and you're out, or designing systems that penalize and shame users were discussed To be honest, I was quite horrified. I don't think that's a very good way to be satisfied with your work. And I certainly don't think that's a very good way to be engaging in productive conversations and dialogue with your users. Another obstacle to success is training the end users. We all know the tremendous volume of change that we can bring into organizations. We work intently to support our users in the new environment, and we're often met with disinterest and low engagement during the process itself. And then complaints and annoyance when it doesn't work as people expect, having attended no sessions. And throughout all of this, we're simply trying to work out how we can best support our users. But I hate to tell you that records managers are not the only frustrated or confused parties here. As this picture shows, our users also have worries. Our users don't really know much about records management. They're confused, despite our really crystal clear messaging about what's a record or what's not a record. They don't really understand it. That training that they received during the system rollout that was sort of half digested, and even then it was sort of half forgotten, didn't really work. Maybe they've heard some weird stories about files going missing once you declare them or if you classify them incorrectly. It's really easy as records managers to present them with a classification schedule that's too complex, understood by only the most diligent user. And let's face it, they don't always care too much about records management. That's someone else's challenge, right? They're also very busy, potentially behind and probably unsure. I know what I do in that situation. I procrastinate. Not many folks are consciously doing the wrong thing, but they're busy, they're unsure, and they procrastinate as a result. Oh, I'll just wait until Rick comes around in 3 weeks' time and we'll catch up then. Well, that catch up never happens. So a really great example of reducing friction in someone's work is what happened at Goldcorp. Goldcorp's a gold mining company. They're based over here in Vancouver. They've got something like 19 or 20,000 employees. It's a huge company. The Goldcorp HR manager in Timmins, that's their mine in Northern Ontario, had paper records going back to the early 1900s and filled several rooms, and the rooms, of course, full of filing cabinets full of paper records. So our HR manager, Lean, was buried in these records, just spent all of her time working in the records, working in the cabinets and the filing rooms. Following the process they went through, all of the records were completely digitized, searchable and accessible, leaving one half-sized cabinet remaining. So today, Lean spends way less time shuffling through paper, generally speaking, at other people's request, and way more time doing rewarding, productive and higher value work. We've actually removed what we call the dehumanizing drudgery from her work. So hopefully you can relate to this story. You've probably been through all or pieces of that journey. So the interesting piece for us is in relaying this story, most people would say that it's successful because we're using less floor space or we're paying less for our storage. Some people might say that it's better because everyone can find records now. But the story, the critical one for us and the critical one for Lean, is that now we're giving her a great experience every single day. And that great experience is transforming her day and transforming her performance and the performance of her colleagues at work. So let's move to our second idea about how exceptional experiences drive our ECM agenda. So creating a great experience reduces friction, but we can actually go further than that. We can actually create more satisfaction. My question here is, are we setting ourselves up to be successful and to be satisfied with the outcomes that we achieve? Let's just think about what we're trying to do here. We're asked to capture content created by everyone, wherever they are, on any device, in any format, always. Hopefully, some or part of this mandate sounds familiar to you. We often get asked to do this or something like this by our clients. The interesting thing for me is that each line here adds a substantial amount of complexity. Think about it another way. We're asked to capture content created by everyone, wherever they are, on any device, in any format, always. Now, this isn't to say that solving that 5 by 5 by 5 Rubik's Cube is impossible, but it's definitely getting harder. Maybe it's less possible that we can be successful at it. So let's think about the possibility of success. Is this possible? Is it possible to capture all content from everyone, coming from everyone, all devices and every format? Well, if it is, we actually can't do it instantly. This is a long journey. We have to start somewhere. If we're not sure if it's possible, well, okay, we probably still have to capture critical content within the enterprise. So we have to start with that smaller section of critical content or vital records. And if we're not sure if it's possible, well, okay, that's fine. In the meantime, we have to start somewhere. So the bottom line is start somewhere. Start with some content. Start with a team or a department or a domain or a device. And then we can start to move forwards. Our advice here is that what if we start simply with some motivated users? And don't forget, we're calling them humans. What if we figure out what they care about and what they're trying to achieve? What if we build them something that's exceptional, that gives them a great experience? So there's another domain that many organizations really struggle with to get compliance. This is timesheets. Timesheets are a killer. They're critical for many organizations, especially firms like Habanero, that we produce invoices and such as a result of our timesheets. But they're typically the last thing that anyone wants to do. It's got nothing to do with the task at hand. It's got nothing to do with building enterprise content management solutions. Oh, and by the way, fill out your timesheet. It's really annoying. It's super administrative. People get no reward out of logging their time. It's also hard when you get to the end of the week, or even worse, maybe the end of the month, and you have to go back and pick through your calendar to figure out what on earth you've been working on. Somehow the time has just evaporated. So in researching this, we found that the shorter the period between doing the work and entering the time, the more accurate the time is. It's obvious. That's all we want. We just want accuracy. So a long story short, we produced a new timekeeping front end for our ERP system. It's called Social Time. This is a picture of it. We had one single design goal for it: make it quick to use, because our research has showed that we want to shorten the period between doing the work and entering the time. And making it quick to use is the best way to do that. So we've got a bunch of design facets within this system to make very easy and very fast interactions. First of all, within our environment, there's a 2-letter URL to access it within the browser. The URL you can see right here allows us to access it externally, st.habaneros.com. There's a task name type ahead to allow you to access and find tasks as quickly as you possibly can. And there's a list of recent tasks, because more likely than not, the tasks I worked on yesterday are the same tasks as I'm going to be working on today. So the design is totally focused towards this one goal. So we got to this point, and we felt that we'd shifted the dial, but we hadn't really produced that killer app. This is a good solution, but it's still not great. We'd made it easy, but we hadn't really changed the motivation behind timesheets. It's still kind of a bit of an annoyance. Then we had a brainwave. Well, what if one person can enter someone else's time? We're a really collaborative organization, and we work in teams. We meet, we brainstorm, we collaborate, we work on projects together. Why, we were thinking, do we all have to enter our own time for a task that we're sharing? Let's build a system whereby 2 people performing a shared task can enter the time once between them and somehow share it. And then we realized we'd stumbled upon our motivator. When people are able to help their colleagues, and assuming their colleagues are grateful for it, they're much, much more likely to do a task. We had just figured out our intrinsic motivator. So we built a way of adding colleagues to the task. There's a bunch of complexities and back-end shenanigans we had to figure out. And then we deployed it. Once we deployed it, timesheet compliance increased 34% the following week. And then it settled back after all the excitement to 25% increase thereafter. That's pretty exceptional results. So I think, coming back to our ECM topic, there are two key takeaways here. First of all, if we're really going to mandate something, then make it as easy as it can possibly be. Like, really easy. I personally really like the idea of one-click declaration, or even better, maybe no-click declaration. And there's some tools that are coming into the marketplace that will permit that. And even then, once we've made it as easy as possible, assuming that our user still has to do something, then think about motivation. How can we tap into intrinsic motivation? It's fascinating to me that people have no problem tagging all 10 friends in their Facebook photo from the weekend. But then the very next day, Monday morning, we struggle to get them to add even a single piece of metadata to a document. And yet it's exactly the same process, whether you're tagging your friend or you're tagging a piece of metadata to a document. Why the difference here? As per our social time example, motivation is the key differentiator here. If we're working with intrinsic motivation, then we're already halfway to creating an exceptional user experience. So you might be able to tell how excited, just on that note, how excited I get about the solution, that this was actually developed during the social time example was developed during a Habanero hackathon. And it was my team that created that solution. It's probably 4 or 5 years ago now. And I personally still get tremendous satisfaction out of seeing people use that every day. And I know that across the company, many people are very, very satisfied using that solution. We're really driving sort of a satisfaction agenda. So our last topic around how exceptional experience impacts ECM is that exceptional experience also allows us to deliver a greater impact into our business. So in 2015, we surveyed a collection of organizations that were embarking on or had embarked already on a records management initiative. The survey was focused on understanding the expected outcomes and the intent behind each of the organization's records management initiatives. We really sought to understand how the initiative was going to impact the business performance. Now, as you'd expect, they all said that compliance was an important outcome. It would have been odd if they hadn't. And one that was important to the business performance, or at least the management of business risk. The interesting thing for me was that 75% of them said that they also sought secondary or tertiary outcomes. And typically these were stuff like productivity, collaboration, employee engagement, or variations therein, like being able to find stuff. 2 of the research organizations actually rated their secondary outcomes as having higher precedence than the outcome of compliance, saying something along the lines of compliance is important, but staying in business is even more important. Now that might not necessarily exactly match with your particular context within your organization, but I think it's a fascinating insight. So my question to you is, do you know what your secondary or tertiary outcomes might be from your ECM initiative? And do you have a shared understanding of those secondary or tertiary outcomes with your team and your broader environment of sponsors? So I think it's fair to say that our business users want more. On the surface of it, the challenge is how we balance their needs with our needs as records managers, how we balance their requirements with our requirements. We've got scarce resources, right? Unless any of you have too much money, too much budget, too many people. Seems pretty unlikely. We don't want to spend too much of our budget on their outcomes, these business people, because that's going to reduce how much of our records management outcomes we can deliver, right? Well, actually, no. I actually believe this is a false dichotomy. Their needs are not actually opposing our needs, and our needs are certainly not opposing their needs. There's a really solid overlap here. During our research, we heard repeatedly that business seeks to be more productive, more efficient, and more collaborative. These are things that are readily attainable through a well thought out ECM solution. So our approach for consolidating records management needs, business needs, and while we're at it, user needs, is the creation of a roadmap. And I say specifically the creation of a roadmap, for the value is within the process. These roadmaps that we create, and again, more specifically, the process behind creating them, are an excellent tool for understanding higher level business imperatives or strategies, gathering requirements, and critically building consensus among stakeholders, and then finally prioritizing and ordering the work. So this is an example of a roadmap. Just to give you a quick tour of this roadmap. So down the left-hand side, we have what we call guiding principles. So in this particular case, they're compliance, collaboration, efficiency, and engagement. And these link back to bigger, broader business strategies or imperatives that have been decided elsewhere in the organization. Each column, this is actually a huge Excel spreadsheet. Each column here is a specific business outcome. For example, we could have provision of meaningful measures, or connect employees, or invisible records declaration. And then each row that we're looking at here further describes each business outcome. We might state value to the business, or value to the employee, or value to compliance, for example. As we go into this, we find that the wording is really important, especially in the value to employee row here. We write it first person so that it's really accessible to the users, and it's easier to understand, for all parties to understand what we're aiming for in the eyes of that end user. So we're working with one client last year, and we worked with them to develop a really detailed roadmap. When we print these out, it ended up being 8 feet long and probably 3 feet tall when we printed it out. And we sent them the printed out poster. So next time we went back to their offices, they'd actually put up that roadmap, all 8 feet of it. It's quite cool, on the wall of their project room. And they were gathered around it with a project sponsor, discussing and debating the details of the ordering of the project. The thing that struck me as I walked into the room was that this is exactly the type of conversation that we're trying to drive. The details of the roadmap are not lost to the select few who see it or can happen to find the final version. We actually want a roadmap that's live and current and gets debated and discussed. So if you want to find out a little bit more, you can read an insight post on this visioning and road mapping process. It's very cool. It's by my colleague Megan Armstrong. And we've actually got a Excel template that we can share with you. So if you're interested in grabbing that roadmap from us, just fire me an email. My email's at the end of this session, and I can email you that template. Okay, so we've discussed how an exceptional experience drives ECM compliance. We can reduce friction, both in the process as well as in the solution. We can drive more satisfaction for all parties involved. And finally, we can make a greater impact on the business when we think about exceptional experience. So for the remainder of this session, we're going to discuss how to actually deliver these exceptional experiences. Now, each of these single topics can easily take up this whole presentation. So I'm going to sort of try to skim the surface a little bit here and not get too much into the details. So this isn't exactly an earth-shattering reveal, but it can be shocking how little real consideration or empathy there is for our users. As we get into the project, we can have the best intentions, but we get into the project and we get into scope and budgets and compliance and file plans and timelines, and we kind of start to forget about the user. What we encourage is you want to get curious and see the world through the eyes of our users. You want to sit with them, experience their job and their pain, their highs and their lows. Mainly because these points of pain and these points of friction will have a huge impact on your ability to be successful. Time spent with the users is so valuable. Not only are you understanding their perspective, but crucially, they start to understand yours. You're not just sitting down and listening to them, you're actually engaging in creating a convert. And for that to happen, you have to really listen, really develop empathy for their journey, their context, and their situation. We find that an empathy map, like the one shown here that we're looking at, can be a really useful way of capturing empathy. And it's funny because I find that I need to do this because I'm not I'm not naturally all that empathetic. And this is a really great way of forcing me to think through where people are at. You can actually use this process, this empathy mapping process, for anything at all. We use it in lots of different contexts within Habanero. So I find that empathy maps are best produced collaboratively. We typically brainstorm them in small groups. So we start with an empty page, and we identify the person or the role. We try to get a bit specific about what they're doing and who it is. We identify that person or that role that we're going to focus on in the center of the page. And then we divide that into 5 sections. We ask, what are they seeing? What are they hearing? What are they thinking? What are they saying? And what are they feeling? And as we go through, we brainstorm and we write bullet points about all of those things. And you can see here the results of that brainstorm. This is a fairly generic one. This is actually about based around empathy mapping for a records manager. So one question that we often get is, how is this different from a process of requirements gathering or discovery that everybody does? I'm very aware that, well, yeah, of course we want to talk to the users. That's obvious, duh. So I think that this is actually an extension to that process. And the empathy mapping thinking surfaces environmental factors that are just so. These are factors that people don't even really think about, including your users. They won't be thinking about them. They're really just part of the furniture of their work life. They're built-in constraints and points of friction that people really just overlook. The interesting thing, as I think about it, is that empathy mapping makes the implicit explicit. We might, for example, discover through empathy mapping that our users are really pushed for time, or that they're dealing with clients when they're working within the solution, or that simply there's a lot of turnover in that role and so they don't get much training. Any of those things are fascinating, critical things for us to understand as we try to build a solution to support them better. I wanted to pause quickly on this journey map, and this is sort of an extension of the idea of empathy mapping. This is the journey mapping through a particular business process, and you can actually track the progress of the emotional journey, if you like, of the users as they progress through the business process that they're working within. So our next how do we develop exceptional experiences is around the context and the domain of user experience. And this is an area that Habanero especially has talked about many times and that we're very, very experienced in. So being empathetic to our users, and again, this is any of those users, really drives insight as to how we can best support them, often in ways that they don't really understand or appreciate. Typically, these insights allow us to develop additional requirements, functions, or features that the solution is going to benefit from. So I'm going to describe a few techniques for designing the user experience. These techniques were actually originally used for the development way back of websites, and then subsequently for us, employee intranets or portals. And we found tremendous value in using those same ideas when we're building enterprise content management solutions. Now, these are quite well understood and documented processes. So again, I'm not going to go into too much detail here. As we go through these, I'd encourage that you think about them as pieces of a toolset that you can pull out and use as you need to. So the first piece in the user experience is information architecture. So probably you understand this term. So information architecture is the way that content is organized within the solution. It could be, for example, organized by department, by date, by process, by client, and so on. And there's typically a navigational element. Think about how you navigate around any solution or any website. And then there's a sort of an element of the page screen layout component, which describes how the individual page comes together itself. Now, don't forget, we're doing this for our users, so we need to develop an information architecture that they understand and they can use, not necessarily an information architecture that we understand, although it's obviously valuable if we do understand it. So it's worth noting that this understanding is driven by terminology. So we have to use vocabulary and terminology that is understood by our target audience within the organization. And we find that we can perform usability testing to validate our design assumptions. Our approach to develop information architecture is to work with our users in order to understand their mental model of the content that they're working within. And this process is called card sorting. And here's an example of a team working through a card sorting exercise. So the way that it works is you engage a small group of users, maybe 4 or 5 per group, and you present them with the content. And in this case, the content is printed or written onto index cards you can see laying here on the table. And then the group organizes those cards in a way that makes sense to them. And when they've finished grouping the cards, they label them. The real value here is in having each group describe their rationale for the organization of their set of cards. And this will inform your own thinking as you're working out your information architecture within the solution. I wouldn't necessarily just take the grouping of cards that they provide and building out your information architecture based on their grouping. I think this is really just research and data gathering. So the second piece of designing the user experience is development of the visual design. So at the beginning of this, I described that I used to have a fairly dim view of user experience and probably of the visual design components specifically. I didn't really understand the huge impact that this can have on the users. It helps users navigate around the solution, it strengthens visual cues, it highlights options, but really it changes your user's perception of the solution. And this is an area in which they can see and understand the work that has gone into the solution. If it looks well designed, they'll trust it more. If it's a poor experience, they're going to trust it less. It's a total cliche, but users will judge your book by its cover. Many organizations have a really good understanding of their visual design standards. You can leverage that extensively as you develop the visual design. You'll find that the flexibility you have in changing the look and feel of your solution is dependent upon that technology that you're using and by your team's skills and your capabilities. So think about these constraints when you're working to develop your design. Our experience in these things is that uninitiated designers can sort of write checks that the technology or the project team can't cash, so be careful. So on that note, we find that SharePoint, and let's face it, SharePoint is often a much maligned in sort of user circles, is actually a really fantastic platform when you develop it correctly. And all of the examples in this presentation are actually of SharePoint itself. We find that we're able to develop exceptional user experiences using SharePoint, and that when it's developed and deployed really well and solidly, it's a really great front end to any system, and particularly a records management system. So our third approach for developing an exceptional experience is leverage. Frankly, leveraging someone else's hard work. Often our clients develop repositories for a specific content domain, maybe policies or procedures or health and safety information, for example. And this leverage strategy is essentially about taking one of those repositories that's been developed in a different context that typically also fall within a records management realm and sort of bolting on records management in the back end. And there's a bunch of different technical approaches to this. So we have been working with one of our clients to develop this solution here. It manages and curates policies within the organization. It's very interesting to me because in this solution, many, but not necessarily all of the tenets of records management have already been considered. In this particular example, there's rigid control of the content. As with records management, it's critical that the right version is being displayed to the end user. Each item of content has really clear ownership and custodianship, and there's a really structured process for adding or updating the content. So coming back to our idea of leverage, we're actually really close to the characteristics that we seek for a records management solution. The only real gap here in this particular example is consideration of retention and disposition within that platform. So much of the hard work of managing and curating the content is already done. In sort of bolting on records management, we need to determine how to apply those missing components. For example, how we apply a file plan, a retention and a disposition cycle. As before, this solution that we're looking at here is being developed within SharePoint. And there's a bunch of different platforms that integrate tightly with SharePoint that allow you to sort of quote unquote bolt on and provide a really robust records management platform in the background. There's a bunch of them. Cloudware's CLM product is one that we've actually had a ton of success with. So our final approach for how we develop these exceptional experiences is probably best considered an ideology rather than a practical approach. But it's a really, really important ideology, and we see clients struggling with it all the time. Simply put, believe in common ground. So don't believe in the false dichotomy that delivering business needs reduces our ability to deliver records management needs. As we've discussed, there's solid overlap between these two ideas. We actually want to seek out that common ground between what's good for the records management agenda and what is good for our end users and our business partners. So there are two types of solutions that come to mind for me when we're talking about seeking out common ground. Firstly, collaboration, and the second one, solution around business process support. So the common ground here being something that substantially supports our users' jobs, as well as delivering records management compliance through that process. So this is an example of a team site where we're supporting a business process. In this case, the business process of recruiting. So these are fictitious names. I should put it on this slide, on this screenshot. These are fictitious names. I'm not sharing anyone's information here. Any link to anyone living is purely coincidence. So this solution has been developed specifically around the steps within that business process, gathering resumes, reviewing those resumes, interviews, reference checks, and so on. So it's really obvious to the user where to store content. So this both reinforces the business process itself. You have to go through these steps, resume, review them, interview, reference checks, and so on. And it, crucially from a records management perspective, it allows us to predict where specific content will reside. And our ability to predict where that specific content will reside allows us to auto-classify or auto-declare content within this solution. And this gets us to the maybe holy grail in terms of auto-declaration of content or auto-classification of content. So the second example here is of a more of a generic collaboration site. This one, again, this is a generic SharePoint site. So the business process here is much less structured. It's for a committee, but the ideas that we've discussed still hold. By thinking through the domain that you're supporting, it's possible to create content areas that your users inherently understand. In this case, we've just got a couple with terms of reference, meeting minutes. So in this case, we're reinforcing the collaboration and supporting the findability for the users, as well as providing the basis of structure for the content. Now, of course, this is a very simple example, but you can build out this to be quite a complex business process or a complex domain into which you're going to put your content. And once we've got that structure, once it's really well defined, that again allows us to auto-classify or to set up auto-classification and auto-declaration of content. Okay, so that brings us to the end of today's session. All about exceptional experiences and enterprise content management. So in wrapping up, I have a few takeaways for you. So we've discussed that an exceptional experience will reduce friction. It'll drive satisfaction for all the different parties involved, and it will deliver greater impact to your business performance overall. Now, don't forget, this isn't just the solution, but think about the broader system and the actual process that you're engaging your users in. If you have to mandate the solution itself, or if you have to mandate compliance, then make it really easy to use. Make the piece that you're mandating very, very simple. Or think about even better, think about how you might intrinsically motivate your users to perform within your system. And then we discussed 4 ways in which you can actually develop these exceptional experiences. First of all, developing empathy. Have a really disciplined approach to developing the user experience. Think about this concept of leverage and potentially leveraging other solutions because they probably exist or will be existing within your enterprise. And then finally, crucially, and this is probably one more relevant for sort of sponsors and stakeholders, believe in the notion of common ground and actually try to seek out common ground. So I'd love to chat further about this. We're getting close to time, but please do reach out. I would really love to chat about the ideas and the concepts that we're talking about today. These are all areas that are gaining momentum as we deploy these techniques more and more in the work we're doing for our clients. And I have one last thought for you. How much better would your life be if you're not the records management nag?